In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on February 11th, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Michigan versus Northwestern. Welsh Ryan is going to feel like a pressure cooker on this night, with a heavyweight rolling in and the home crowd smelling a chance to rattle the rankings. Michigan walks in playing like one of the top teams in the country, playing fast, sharing the ball, and turning almost every defensive stop into a chance to run the floor with fresh legs off the bench. They are comfortable pushing tempo, getting into their sets early, and letting that efficient offense snowball, which makes them look terrifying when you only check the box scores. Northwestern is living in a very different reality, grinding through a rough stretch, sitting near the bottom of the league table, and trying to steady the ship after some humbling nights against stronger opponents. The Wildcats are far more at ease when the game slows, when possessions feel like long chess matches instead of a sprint, and Welsh Ryan has quietly been a place where that more deliberate style holds up better than their overall record suggests. Michigan has also shown a bit of a split personality, looking like a buzzsaw at home while being a little less ruthless in true road environments, with turnovers and some shaky late-game choices popping up just enough to make big margins feel a bit fragile. Honestly, that is the kind of thing that does not matter much when the opponent rolls over, but when a home underdog digs in and refuses to go away, those little cracks can be the difference between a 30-point laugher and a game that just sort of hovers in a much tighter window. Several prediction models and public pick sites are already tilting toward the home side with the points, which lines up with the idea that this matchup is less about a shock upset and more about whether the favorite can truly separate for 40 minutes in a noisy building that loves playing spoiler. The most likely story feels like Michigan controlling the flow, never quite looking panicked, but finding that Northwestern's slower pulse, home crowd energy, and just enough shot-making keep the whole thing annoyingly close for anyone expecting a complete demolition. As our first pick for this matchup, the Northwestern Wildcats to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. These two offenses, taken together, tend to create games that land in a much higher scoring neighborhood than what the market is suggesting, with season averages that push their combined output well into the 160s. Michigan's pace is a big part of that, because they are happiest when the game feels like a track meet, with possessions stacking up and defenses scrambling, and they rarely seem interested in tapping the brakes if the rhythm is working. Northwestern might prefer something calmer, but when a team that likes to run keeps pressing the gas, the slower team usually gets dragged along, especially if it is chasing from behind and needs more possessions just to stay in touch. That is where things get fun, because Michigan's offense is not just fast, it is efficient, so their games naturally lean toward action, while Northwestern's defense has had enough leaky stretches that even off shooting nights can still land in that 130s to 140s range on the total scoreboard. Let me explain it another way. If Michigan is doing what it has been doing most of the season, it is living in the 80s or even flirting with the 90s, and that kind of output basically dares the opponent to either keep up or get buried trying. A big home underdog in that spot rarely chooses to lose slowly, so Northwestern is likely hunting threes, taking quicker shots than usual, and accepting that a little chaos is better than watching the clock bleed out. Games like that have a funny rhythm. The lead might bounce around that middle zone where it never feels truly safe, which invites the classic late-game sequence of quick fouls, free throws, and rushed possessions that add points in a hurry right when it feels like the final score should already be settled. On top of that, Northwestern has leaned toward higher scoring results all season, especially at home, with a strong pattern of games finishing above expectations, and several independent computer models and pick sites are shading their projections to the higher scoring side rather than tightening things down. All of that together paints a picture of a matchup where pace, style, and situation all quietly tug the total upward, with both teams doing their part to keep the scoreboard busy from tip until the final horn sounds. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Missouri versus Texas A&M. Texas A&M steps into this matchup a little scuffed up, a little annoyed, and very ready to make someone else pay for it. They have dropped 2 straight, including a humbling night against Florida at home and that wild shootout at Alabama, so this is one of those spots where a good team hears all the noise and wants to answer it with 40 focused minutes. Missouri walks in with the opposite emotional baggage, a group that just stacked wins over Mississippi State and South Carolina, and suddenly feels like it belongs in every bracket conversation that pops up on social media or ESPN. On paper, you get records that mirror each other nicely, both sitting in that sweet spot where fans start calculating tournament seeds in their heads on a random Wednesday afternoon. Texas A&M leans into an identity that feels built for the modern game, spreading you out, hunting threes, and turning small windows of space into big momentum swings. They score like a team that always has one more run in the tank, which matters a lot when you start thinking about margins instead of just who wins. Missouri, by contrast, would rather make every possession feel like a negotiation, winning with physical defense, structure, and that quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can string together stops when the building gets loud. The funny part is that the very thing Missouri hangs its hat on, that proud defense, comes with a built-in blind spot. They are strong inside, yet they leak a lot of clean looks from deep, and no team wants to see a confident Aggie group lining up open threes all night. Reed Arena itself becomes part of the handicap here, not just a gym, more like a pressure cooker where runs feel longer, slumps feel shorter, and visiting teams often need a few trips down the floor just to find their legs. Texas A&M has already stacked a strong record in that building, and the style they play there is especially punishing for a defense that struggles to chase shooters through screens for a full game. Missouri has been competitive away from home, but true road games in this league have a way of exposing any little flaw, and their specific weakness lines up almost perfectly with what A&M wants to do when it is rolling. Honestly, it feels like the exact kind of spot where the home favorite can trade baskets early, then gradually stretch that thing out as tired legs start arriving a half step late to the perimeter late in the second half. Urgency tilts the emotional edge toward College Station 2. A team that has real offensive firepower and has just been punched twice usually does not tiptoe into the next one. It comes out with purpose, it shortens the rotation a bit, leans harder on its main identity, and tries to re-establish what it thinks it is. Missouri is good enough to throw a scare into anyone, that is clear, but it is walking straight into a version of the matchup that highlights its least comfortable defensive habits against a favorite that has every reason to push the gas, not coast. When you put all that together, the records, the building, the stylistic collision, and the psychology of a contender trying to halt a skid, the side that lives behind the three-point line and feeds off its home crowd projects as the one more likely to win this by a clear enough margin to make backers happy, not nervous. As our first pick for this matchup, the Texas A&M Aggies to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Texas A&M does not actually play at some out-of-control, sprint every trip tempo. They are more like a team that picks its spots, uses its spacing to manufacture big swings, and is comfortable methodically creating the look it wants. Missouri is similar in that way, slightly quicker than average, sure, but more deliberate than the scoring numbers might suggest, especially when the game starts to tighten and every trip feels a bit heavier. When you marry that kind of pace with a defense that prides itself on guarding the paint, contesting at the rim, and finishing possessions on the glass, you suddenly need a pretty serious level of shot making from both sides to push a lofty total across the line. Missouri helps that under angle more than it hurts it, even with its issues chasing shooters. They protect the interior well. They showed in that South Carolina win that they can control the boards and squeeze second chance looks out of a game, and that kind of profile quietly shaves off a few easy points that overs usually rely on. If the first shot is contested and the rebound is secured more often than not, all those little tip-ins and scramble threes that blow totals open just do not show up as often. On the other side, Texas A&M is coming off a stretch where its games have exploded on the scoreboard, and that actually creates a funny bit of tension for this number. Recent high-scoring results push perception one way, but they also give the coaching staff clear film to hammer on defensively. And teams that see themselves as serious players in March do not like living in chaos for long. It would not be surprising to see a slightly more controlled version of their usual style here. Still aggressive, still hunting threes, just with a little more care with the ball and a bit more patience when they have a lead. That kind of subtle shift does not change who they are, but it can be just enough to keep a game entertaining without turning it into a scoring contest that lives on every highlight reel. February SEC games also tend to carry a certain weight. Legs are a little tired, scouting reports are thicker, and everyone has seen everyone, which usually favors half-court execution and longer, more physical possessions. Even if there are a couple of scoring runs, the overall pattern can still lean toward a total that falls short of the more optimistic expectations that come from staring at season averages alone. So when you blend the moderate tempo, the interior defense and rebounding edge on one side, and the likely emphasis on a slightly tighter defensive showing after some wild results on the other, the picture that emerges is of a game that scores well, just not quite as freely as the number suggests. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Tennessee versus Mississippi State. Tennessee walks into Starkville with that feeling of a team that knows exactly who it is and is not shy about it. The style is built on patience and pressure, slowing you down in the half court, leaning on physical possessions, and then turning every loose ball into something useful on the other end. It is the kind of approach that does not always look flashy on a highlight reel, but it wears on opponents little by little, like a long road trip where the music stopped an hour ago and you are still 3 exits away. Mississippi State brings a very different personality to the floor. The game often tilts into a more open, more free-flowing rhythm with them, with quick exchanges, quicker shots, and a comfort level in games that feel a bit wild around the edges. They are dangerous in that chaos, but the structure behind it is not as sturdy, especially when they are asked to stack up stop after stop against an offense that will actually run through actions and wait for something clean. You know that feeling when one friend always plays pickup ball like it is a sprint and the other plays like it is a chess match. This matchup lives right in that tension. The market respect for the home court is still there, of course, because SAC environments on a weeknight are no joke, and Starkville can absolutely get loud and weird in the best way. Even so, the underlying gap between these two profiles shows up when you strip away the noise. One side has the stronger defensive core, the more reliable half-court offense, and a track record of holding up against better competition. The other side has the puncher's chance energy, which is fun, but it leans more on streaks and emotion than on structure. Honestly, that kind of underdog can absolutely swing a game, but over 40 minutes it often runs into the same wall, especially when it faces a team that finishes possessions on the glass and forces tough, late clock looks over and over again. There are some lingering question marks around the visitors in terms of health and minute distribution, and that always matters in college hoops where one key rotation piece can shift everything. That uncertainty adds a small layer of risk to any prediction, no doubt, and it is fair to wonder how much wiggle room there is if a secondary contributor is limited or not fully in rhythm. Even with that in mind, the bigger picture still tilts toward the team that brings more depth, more consistent physicality, and a cleaner shot profile into this kind of matchup. The style that grinds on opponents defensively and stays efficient enough offensively tends to travel reasonably well, even in loud buildings, especially when it can close late with defense and free throws rather than hoping for a hot streak. As our first pick for this matchup, the Tennessee Volunteers to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The scoring side of this game has a very different flavor, and that is where things get a little more entertaining for anyone who likes watching the scoreboard as much as the sets. One team prefers a more measured pace, working the clock, running real actions, and trusting its efficiency to carry the load rather than speed. The other is very comfortable in games that feel messy, that swing back and forth, and that sometimes look more like a pickup run at the rec center than a tidy coaching clinic. Put those personalities in the same gym, and you get a clash where rhythm becomes as important as any single matchup on the floor. The more methodical side still scores with plenty of punch when it gets what it wants, which is usually good looks created out of structure rather than hero ball. Good spacing, deliberate ball movement, and smart shot selection tend to add up over 4 quarters in a way that does not always feel explosive possession by possession but looks pretty loud when you check the box score later. On the other hand, Mississippi State leans into pace and pressure, and their games often feel like they are daring the scoreboard operator to keep up. They foul, they attack, they keep coming even when the situation is not ideal, and that kind of approach has a funny way of inflating totals through free throws and second chances. Here is the thing, when a patient, efficient offense meets a looser, faster style that does not mind trading possessions, the total often hinges less on pure shot making and more on how long the game stays stretched out. If the tempo leans toward the faster side and the whistle is active, you get more possessions, more trips to the line, and more chances for both teams to stack points even without shooting the lights out. College hoops fans know those last few minutes can feel like their own mini-game, with intentional fouls, quick shots, and timeouts turning a normal score into something that suddenly looks very different from where it was with 4 minutes left. This matchup has that kind of potential, especially with a home team that is unlikely to quietly let the clock bleed out if it is trailing. Models and simulations can tilt slightly toward a tighter scoring outcome, and that is understandable when you look strictly at efficiency numbers on a sheet. Real games, though, live in the little swings, the loose balls, the foul trouble, and the emotional spurts that do not always show up cleanly in a projection. And the more you picture an efficient offense doing what it usually does, paired with an opponent that invites chaos and keeps pressing the gas, the easier it is to imagine a flow where points stack up faster than a simple spreadsheet might suggest. Honestly, this one feels like it has plenty of paths where the pace, the fouls, and the late-game situation keep feeding the scoreboard rather than starving it. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Cincinnati versus Kansas State. This spread feels like a personality test for bettors. Do you trust the team that already has a clear identity, or the one having a bit of an identity crisis in its own building? Cincinnati walks in with a resume that looks confusing at first glance. They are sitting at 12-12 overall and 4-7 in the Big 12, and the glaring stain is that 0-9 mark away from fifth-third arena this season. On the surface, that screams do not back this team on the road, but the underlying profile does not match the basic record. Analytics paint a very different picture, with Cincinnati around the mid-50s on KenPom and Kansas State drifting down toward the 90th spot, so the computers see a much bigger gap than the win-loss columns suggest. Kansas State, for its part, has a record that is only slightly worse on paper, roughly 10-13 overall and 1-9 in league play. That sounds similar on the surface, yet the current form feels a lot shakier. This is a group that has not really settled on a stable version of itself, which is a problem when you are dealing with a physical opponent that already knows how it wants to play. Here is the thing, Cincinnati leans on a defensive backbone that tends to travel better than hot shooting streaks. By the numbers, this is a top 10 level defense on KenPom, holding opponents to roughly 67 points per game on about 41% shooting. That type of profile usually holds up whether you are in your own arena, in a hostile gym in Manhattan, or playing in a neutral site with sleepy crowds. It is like bringing a good pass rush into a playoff game. It shows up even when the offense feels a little off. They are not at full strength, and that matters, but it does not change the basic shape of who they are. Forward, Jalen Haynes is still out after knee surgery, and freshman wing Sean Abev remains sidelined by that high ankle sprain the staff already warned could linger for weeks. Both guys are on the current roster, yet there is nothing public that suggests either is ready to jump back in for this matchup. So from a handicapping point of view, you treat them as unavailable. On the flip side, 7'2" center Mustafa Thiam, also on the active roster, has already swung in the other direction, moving from day to probable, then going out and dropping 15 points in his return against UCF, which backs up the idea that he should be viewed as a real piece for this one unless something totally new pops up. Kansas State's depth chart looks more like a trainer's log than a clean rotation. Wing scorer Abdi Bashir Jr., who had been giving them double-digit scoring, has had foot surgery and is listed as out. Elias Rapieke, Mobi Ikegwurika, and Andre Kostic are all on the current roster as well, yet they are tagged as out or doubtful with notes that sound very much like will not take the court or unlikely to play here. So what you end up with is a roster that leans heavily on lead guard PJ Haggerty, who is active and very much driving their offense, while the rest of the cast has to punch above its weight. In Big 12 play, the cracks show up in basic categories that tend to decide spreads against serious defenses. Kansas State is scoring only about 72.9 points per game in league, near the bottom of the conference. They are living by the 3, sitting near the top of the Big 12 in attempts and makes from deep, yet they carry the worst rebounding margin at roughly minus 9.9 per game, the highest foul rate, and the fewest free throw attempts in the league. That is a rough combo against a Cincinnati team that is built around physicality, control of the glass, and a scheme that forces you to make tough shots over length rather than walk to the stripe all night. Honestly, when you put that all together, you get one team that can defend, rebound, and lean on a healthier rotation, and another that is short on bodies, overly reliant on jumpers, and struggling to own the paint. If Cincinnati gets even a B- offensive showing, that top-tier defense and that edge on the boards give them a very clear path to hanging tough in a hostile environment and still landing on the right side of this kind of spread more often than not. As our first pick for this matchup, the Cincinnati Bearcats to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Kansas State's overall scoring average still sits in the low 80s because of the pace and rhythm they built in non-conference play. Conference life has told a different story. You see things like 73 against UCF, 83 at Oklahoma State in a loss, 81 against Utah, then the come-down games, 62 versus Kansas, 54 at West Virginia, 61 against Iowa State, and 82 in that chaotic collapse at TCU. It is not that they cannot score, it is that their production has become streaky and opponent-dependent. That shift lines up with the injury picture and the shot profile. Without Bashir, Rapieka, Ikegwuruka, and Kostick available or likely to play, the spacing and shooting help around Haggerty thins out. They can still catch fire from deep for stretches, sure, but they also slide into those long, contested two-point attempts where they are hitting barely around 32%, and a lot of trips in without the ball ever getting deep into the paint. Those possessions chew clock, frustrate fans, and quietly drag totals down even when it feels like there is a lot of action. Cincinnati, on the other hand, just put up 92 points on UCF at home, and that sticks in the mind because big numbers always do. Pull the camera back, and you are still talking about a group averaging roughly 72 points per game that leans into a defense-first identity. That 0-9 record away from home tells you something subtle about their offense. It does not naturally carry the same flow on unfamiliar rims. They do not suddenly turn into a bad team. They simply tend to play more possession by possession, which usually trims a few points off the scoreboard. Their defensive metrics support a lower scoring script too. They sit in that top 10 band on KenPom defensively, holding opponents in the high 60s and around 41% from the field. The stated plan in previews for this matchup has been to treat Haggerty as the head of the snake, turn this into a rock fight around him, and force the rest of the makeshift Kansas State lineup to make jumpers from that uncomfortable mid-range zone. When you pair that idea with the fact that Kansas State already ranks last in the league in free throw attempts, you are talking about fewer easy looks at the rim and fewer freebies with the clock stopped. Games shaped like that tend to crawl rather than race. Fewer clean drives, more contested pull-ups, and more half-court sets mean extra time bleeding off the shot clock every trip. Both coaches know this spot matters for momentum, so it would not be surprising to see rotations tightened up, timeouts used to script specific plays, and each possession treated like a small event. If you have watched many Big 12 weeknight games, you know that feel when every miss gets a groan and every made jumper feels huge, and that usually does not add up to a wild shootout. When you stack it all together, you get Cincinnati's elite defense, Kansas State's short-handed perimeter rotation, recent scoring slippage once league play hit, and a projected total that still leans on earlier season pace numbers rather than the current grind. All of that points toward a game that is more likely to settle into the high 60s or low 70s for each side than to explode into a track meet that clears a lofty bar with room to spare. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. New Mexico versus Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon feels like that transfer student who was supposed to need time to settle in, then quietly walks to the front of the class and starts running the discussion. First year in this tougher league, and they are already leaning into a clear identity, physical, defense first, and not remotely shy about making opponents uncomfortable. That is not just effort talk, either. Their profile this season leans heavily toward a strong defensive efficiency number and a knack for keeping opponents stuck in that high 60s scoring range, which is right in their comfort zone. New Mexico shows up with a very different vibe, more like a band that prefers the volume knob turned all the way up. They score freely, they like rhythm, and they look their best when the game feels open and flowing rather than tight and choppy. The offense sits in that upper tier nationally, and they can fill up the scoreboard in a hurry when the threes fall and the drive and kick game clicks. The thing is, rhythm is exactly what this kind of rugged home defense tries to choke out. The home and road splits tell a story that fits what your eyes would expect. New Mexico has been outstanding in front of its own crowd at altitude, piling up wins in that building, but on the road they slide from dominant to simply good. Grand Canyon at home is a different animal, very comfortable in their own gym, with a record there that looks like a team that trusts its building and its routine, something in the range of 15-8 overall with an 11-2 kind of home mark behind it. You feel that in the way the crowd rides every defensive stand, and it matters in late-game situations when whistles get a little tighter and execution matters more than flair. Honestly, the injury sheet nudges this matchup toward the more stable side as well. New Mexico carries a longer list, with multiple guards shut down for the season and another rotation forward still hovering in that uncertain zone. Grand Canyon, by contrast, is basically dealing with one key backcourt name on the shelf right now. It sounds small, but over 40 minutes in a game that figures to be physical, that extra bit of usable depth shapes how hard a team can play defensively without worrying about running out of gas or stacking up fouls. Here is the thing, in a matchup where the spread is short and the market is more or less asking you to pick the more reliable basketball personality, defensive structure plus a loud home court usually travels better than a rhythm-based offense that leaves home. New Mexico absolutely has higher scoring peaks, and there is a real scenario where they shoot their way into control early. But when you account for Grand Canyon's year one toughness in this league, the way they squeeze games in the second half, the home environment, and New Mexico's slightly thinner depth, the tilt pulls toward the side that can win even when shots do not fall perfectly. As our first pick for this matchup, the Grand Canyon Antelopes to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. New Mexico's season numbers sit in that low 80s points per game range, and Grand Canyon sits closer to the mid-70s. Add in that both surrender something right around the high 60s, and on paper it is easy to imagine a big number. That is usually where people's minds go first. Lots of talent, fast pace, national TV, so of course everyone expects points. Let me explain why that first instinct might be a little too loud here. Tempo-wise, neither team is crawling, but they are not living in chaos either. New Mexico plays at a brisk pace, somewhere just under 70 possessions a night, and Grand Canyon is a touch slower, still a bit above the national middle but not wild. In early non-conference games, that kind of tempo can inflate totals because coaches are more relaxed, benches are longer, and everyone is happy to trade baskets. Late in the season, in a conference race with tournament bids and seeding hanging over every possession, those same numbers feel different. Coaches shorten rotations, call more sets, and suddenly 10 seconds stay on the shot clock a lot more often. The defensive side of the ledger keeps tugging this matchup toward a tighter scoring outcome. New Mexico's current profile has them allowing just under 70 points a night, and their efficiency numbers back up that it is no fluke. They use length and activity to bother shooters, and when they are locked in, they can string together stops in ways that completely change the mood of a game. Grand Canyon, for its part, keeps leaning on a defense that holds opponents in that high 60s band, protects the glass, and does not give up comfortable looks from deep without a fight. If you think about how that feels from a player's perspective, it is a lot of bumping, a lot of late closeouts, and not many clean catch and shoot moments. The human side matters too. New Mexico's injury list trims their backcourt and wing depth, thanks to multiple guards in redshirt or ruled out and another piece still in question. That kind of attrition naturally pushes a team towards slightly more cautious decisions, fewer reckless pushes in transition, a bit more concern about foul trouble, and a tendency to value each half-court possession a touch more. Grand Canyon dealing with one notable guard absence adds a similar incentive on their side, even if their core rotation stays relatively intact. Coaches feel that, and you often see it in more measured substitution patterns and fewer green light moments. Put the pieces together, and the picture that emerges is less about constant end-to-end fireworks and more about a game that spends long stretches around disciplined half-court possessions. New Mexico's offense is good enough to punch through for big runs, and Grand Canyon's shooting at home can absolutely lead to sharp spurts. But both defenses know how to drag games back into the mud when needed, and both understand that allowing this matchup to speed up unchecked only increases risk. So the expectation leans toward a total that finishes below the aggressive scoring projection people might have in their heads when they see these names, something that feels more like a mid-range, hard-fought total where every late bucket is earned rather than handed out. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.